Hey guys, this is Mason Blue. Welcome to my first song journey video. In this first video, I'm going to be talking to you about the behind the scenes process of creating Pull Me Under by Frannie B. So Pull Me Under is a special song because it's one of those records that I really connected with when I started working on it. When Frannie contacted me about the song, she sent me a demo with piano and some drum beats just for me to get an idea what she wanted to do. And she wanted something in the vein of Shawn Mendes, clean Bandit, super fresh, like youthful pop, like top 40s vibes. And when I first heard the demo, I had this idea of creating like a dancehall inspired beat, something like ba, 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 ba. And that kind of sparked the idea for the rest of the drums. Have a listen to this. So that was the foundation for the beat. When I first started working on it, I had this solid dancehall infused beat and I added some extra percussions to give it extra texture. When it comes to productions like that, I like using a lot of percussive elements to create movement and nuances in the beat. And I make my transitions from various sort of percussive elements. In this case, I had a combination of a few percussive loops. I wanted to have a clap bass groove. I remember listening to Graveyard by Halsey, and there was this pre-chorus there where she goes, "Oh, cause I keep digging myself down deeper, I won't stop till I get where you are." And I kind of felt inspired to create something in that sort of direction because it really fit the brief. So it was pretty much that. With some percussions, so purely clap based. When we got to the chorus, I wanted to expand on the beat and added some extra shakers. And what I did was to separate the two sections of the chorus by adding a percussive feel. Again, this feel is a combination of a few different percussive samples. And what I did was actually pan different percussive samples left and right to create more of a three-dimensional space. I love that. It's like so tropic, so exotic, and it's adding this sort of fresh vibe to the beat. What I did in the second verse was to actually break it down just to a clock. And I just didn't want to have a clock, but I actually added a little bit of a phasing to it. Added a logic phaser just to give it a different color. And then we have the regular groove from verse 1. But what I wanted to do was to actually elevate the drum groove in this second verse. And the second half of it actually has a hip hop inspired beat. Super like quirky and contemporary, and what's important to note is like when I produce drums for a particular record, I normally separate my drums to low and high drums or top and bottom drums. And the reason for this is create more of a separation of frequencies and to create more impact, especially in the low end. And then the high end of the spectrum is more to create the shimmer, the sizzle. So when you listen to the drum beat actually has a bit more presence and it's more easily identifiable. And then I mix the two buses, the low and high bus, into a drum sum bus, or a drum dim sum bus, as I like to call it. Next up, we have the bass. And in the verses, I just have a normal 808 bass just because I wanted something that's not getting in the way of the kick drum, something that's got oomph, weight to it, but it's not obtrusive. The bass is just following the kick, bum, bum, bum. And then in the second half of the verse, I actually wanted to add another layer, another texture, and I added this evolving bass, as you'll see here. And the reason I added it is I wanted to add a bit more movement to the whole thing, as opposed to just having a pure bass throughout the whole verse. And what I did with the evolving bass is to actually make it more stereo, so you can hear it from both sides, and it fills the sonic spectrum a bit more. I sidechained this to the kick essentially, and what I did as well was to use reactive EQ, which is something that I love doing quite a lot with various instruments and vocals sometimes. Basically, I sidechained the evolving bass to my kick, and what that does, it analyzes the frequencies of both instruments and it carves out frequencies for them to actually shine through, and so they don't fight. And you can tweak the amount of reactive EQ you want, just so it matches your vision of the track essentially, and every instrument has got their own little pocket to fill. Then when we go to the pre-chorus, we have this bass lead, which is super dark, kind of The Weeknd inspired. Super dark. And what's important to mention here is we have the mono part of the bass, which is obviously the low frequencies, but then I've basically made the top part of the bass more stereo, just because I wanted to feel more of the frequencies there, just because we haven't got too many elements playing there. So the trick is actually make it sound full with less elements. And here is an important moment to mention, like when I first started producing music, I would make my production so busy. I would add so many elements because I would think it needs to be rich, it needs to have a lot of power and momentum. But actually, the more music I produced, the less elements I started introducing certain sections, because I learned through talking to people, through getting feedback, less is more. And it's so true, and it helps with dynamic range, increased loudness overall when the track gets mastered, and it's easier for frequencies to actually find their own little place. Then when we have the chorus, I still have the 808 bass from the verse, but what I've done is I've played the pattern and I've printed it, or bounced it, as some people might prefer to say it, and I've basically cut the low end of it up until 150 hertz, up until actually 136. And then I use thermal, which is a plugin by Output, and it's one of my favorite plugins ever. I think I use it in every production really, because it's a nice distortion plugin that adds more character and personality to every sound, especially if you want to give them a bit more of a edge of personality. And I use thermal on the top bass, and essentially the role of it is to make the overall bass cut through more, especially if you're listening through telephones or radio speakers or any sort of user speakers. They're not necessarily like studio speakers. Then I've basically sidechained the bass to the kick, just so it creates more space and it puts in a particular pocket. Another interesting thing I've done here is I've got a gritty bass lead, which I've called this bad boy, and essentially I've used the pitch bend for it, so when the chorus kicks in, it sounds like the beats are merging, like does that sort of okay, and it sounds like that, so it goes so I've played the normal bass, and part of it is pitch bend, part of it is normal. This is normal. So I've kind of played with different textures for this bass. So the whole thing at the moment sounds like that. Great. And then in the second verse, we have the same 808. But what's interesting here is when the hip hop inspired beat comes through, I've got some extra layers to that normal bass that actually make it sound more badass, and they give it that sort of edgy element. And then that sort of gritty and evolving bass are the meat and potatoes of that beat. What's happening with the gritty bass is I've sidechained it to the kick, but at the same time, I'm using the EQ to sidechain it to the kick, which essentially carves more space for that to thrive, just because we've got quite a lot of bass elements, and what I wanted was not to obstruct the frequencies, but to actually make it more of a melodic / production choice in there. So again, this is what we've got with the second part of the verse. And then when we get to the pre-chorus, we have the same elements from the first pre-chorus, but what's important to mention is we got this bass lead top, which is the same as the low bass, but I've made it super low mid to kind of high mid. Actually, it's purely low mids inspired, just because it's between 158 to 845 hertz, so it's pretty low mid based. And what it does essentially, it creates more of a 3D space. I've doubled it with Doubler 2 by Waves, and that essentially expanded the whole sound more because I wanted it to feel bigger than the first verse, so we actually moving somewhere with the track. I wanted to tell the story of the track in a different way for this next section. And when we get to the second chorus, I've used that gritty bass I talked about a few minutes ago, and I've printed it, pitch bent it upwards, so it has this sort of sound to it. And the reason I've done this is because I've dropped the first bar of the chorus beat, and it's basically just like that. Yeah, so essentially Frannie comes in, it's too late, but I'm already falling. And then we come in with the beat, but that bass is the anchor between that breakdown and the beat that comes after. Essentially, I think it's so cool. It's like so juicy, it adds so much character to it. And then we have the same vibe from last time. Just keeping that pattern going to establish the familiarity. Hey. Next up, we've got our melodic instruments here, and I call all my melodic instruments like plucks, keys, pads, synths, leads. I call them melodic as a collective term because I put them in a bus that I call melodic. Essentially, that's how I make sense of it. If you have a different way of naming it, put in the comments. Let me know how you call it. Maybe I'll learn something from you today. But essentially, when I started the song, I knew I wanted the intro to feel a bit dreamy, a bit more fairy tale-esque in a way. That's why I started with these plugs. If you listen closely, they're not just playing the chords, but there's a melody attached to them. Now this is important just because we haven't got drums. So we still need something to drive us throughout this section, okay? And another element that I thought was super important was this vocal texture. I've called it texture just because it's made of a vocal sample. I wanted to have a signature melody in this section. So I've composed this little bad boy here. And it's just something to help you identify the song when you hear it for the first time. It's like, okay, this is Pull Me Under by Frannie. Da, 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 da. And then, just because I wanted an extra impact, I've added a vocal impact to this part. It's super punchy. I distorted it and basically added a bit more of a performance to it. Like, so it cuts a bit more. It basically brings out and more of a nasal frequency in the sound, just so it creates more of a frequency separation. And then I've played another response melody just before the verse, so it brings it nicely into verse 1. So that little thing here, so cool. So then we have the verse. The main thing that I've really found interesting when working on this verse, or all verses actually, was Frannie's vocals were quite sparse, which allowed for a lot of play with different melodic lines and a lot of elements to fill that space and to have a conversation with the lead vocal. So what I did here was to create these responses to her lines. So all these da 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 da. So when you play with the vocal, we have something like this. How did I get here? Oh no. Feel too hard, too fast, can't slow. So we always communicating with the lead vocal, and this vocal texture is quite ambient. Again, just not to detract from the vocal, but it just complementing it. Okay, we have the keys and guitar here. Guitar's pan one way, just so it doesn't get in the way. It's more of a rhythm instrument. And then we have vocal impacts. It's more of a melodic percussive impact, just so it emphasizes the downbeat, which I think is super important when you have a beat like that. And then for the second half of the verse, I've added the plucks from the intro. Just playing a more of a minimal pattern, just because again we have a lead vocal and we don't want to get in the way. And then we have a nice little plucky transition into the pre-chorus. So same melody as before. So this time I've doubled that melody an octave up. So we have this element. It's so cool. And what you can probably hear is I've introduced a little glide to it. So it's not just but it's more it's so cool. It's something K-pop uses quite a lot as well, actually. Then we have pre-chorus, and for this one, I wanted to keep it super dreamy again. We've got the pad with some upper resonances. And then, again, I wanted to add little ambient textures to complement Franny's lead vocal. They're just complementing the background. And then we're taking it to the chorus, essentially. We have these reverse elements. And they're layered, essentially. The first one is softer, and the second one that comes a bit later is a bit sharper, a bit brighter, just to create that anticipation for what's to come next. And then we have a little riser as part of that. Yeah. When it comes to the chorus, I knew I wanted to have an organic instrument that was driving the whole thing, and I soon discovered that this was going to be a guitar, essentially. And I wanted an acoustic guitar and not an electric guitar, because I wanted the chorus to still have this sort of realistic, organic vibe to it. When you listen to it, like it could be a song you just play around the bonfire, or you're on the beach and you're playing this song on the guitar. And this is something I always think about when I produce music. Like, could this song sound great if you strip it down just to like guitar and vocals or piano and vocals? And this was super important for me when I was working on this section. So we have this guitar. And then we have the ambience. Just because of the way the vocals have been written, I didn't want to add too many melodic elements that were playing melodies, but I wanted to use them as space fillers, like having a lot of reverb and playing with these effects to create a certain space to help the vocals shine. And then the guitar and the ambience sound like that. So beautiful, so beautiful. Then we have another rhythm guitar. And this guitar is quite plucky, as you can hear. This is more just to create more of a percussive feeling when you listen to the chorus. And I've added CLA guitar to it, just to add a bit more of a shimmer, a bit more sparkle. And I've carved some 2 to 5K frequencies. And the second part of the chorus, we've got a pad, which is basically elevating the whole thing a bit more and making it sound bigger. The pad sounds like this. Super warm. And again, the plucks from the verse, we have them again. And the reason for this is we want to have some sort of familiarity and easy to follow structure, and not a completely different thing, just because this is pop music and pop music thrives on familiarity. And again, just to end the chorus, we have this finishing line. Super bright, super distorted. Again, I've got thermal on it, and it's quite small sounding. I've cut it all the way to 625 hertz just because I wanted it to be more of a texture instead of an instrument. Okay, and then when it comes to the second verse, we have these keys. They're basically a pad from the previous sections that I've played, bounced, and sped up via one of the Logic settings, speed up, and it's sped up quite a lot, to be honest. And what that does essentially brings it back into the section, which is such a cool little trick, especially when I have a breakdown section. Check it out. And then we go back into the verse. We have the hip hop section. And then in the second pre-chorus, notice something different. What I've got here is these dream plucks. The way they sound normally is like that. Super bright, super like housey, but I've added OTT by Xfer just to give them extra sizzle. And then Fat Effects, which is one of Logic's stock plugins, and I've made them quite subdued, very sort of lo-fi sounding. And then Doubler, just because I wanted them to feel a bit bigger, a bit more 3D. And this is how the whole section sounds. And I've got a little bit of an impact here, like effects, just because I wanted to emphasize certain beats of this. Super subtle, it's got delay on it. And last but not least, we've got the lead vocal. So when I first got Frannie's vocals before I started mixing them, I really liked the overall delivery and the emotion behind it. I think Frannie's got such a unique way of delivering the story of a song. Not just because she's written the song, but just because of the way she interprets music and the way she sings it. Like, she's so talented, honestly, guys, check her out. And I remember having this section in the pre-chorus that we initially had it sung in a more of a straight linear way. You got me so down. And I remember the demo, it had this sort of pitch bend characteristic to it. You got me so down. And I wanted to have this in the final version because I thought it added so much personality to it. Listen to this.
Wish I never saw you. You got me so down. It's too late.
And I wanted to emphasize this section, and I actually made it drier. So if you listen to this,
Never saw you.
dry,
You got me so down. It's too late.
and it goes dry, which is so important because I wanted to have a more intimate moment just before the chorus hits. So with the vocal, a few different things. I've used corrective subtractive EQ, which basically tames all the harsh frequencies in the vocals. I've added some compression just to tame the loudest parts of the track. Then we've got additive EQ just to add a bit more shimmer, a bit more sizzle to the vocals. I'm using VSA compressor by a company called Softtube, which is not loading for me at the moment, which is a bit bizarre. And this essentially has this sort of nice analog warmth to it, which I really, really like. Pro DS by Fat Filter, just to tame any sibilant sounds in there, the top parts. OTT, which I use on vocals quite a lot, just to add this sort of crispness to them in the top range. Silk Vocal by Waves, it's one of my favorite plugins ever, honestly. Producer friend of mine, Tim Owen, shout out to Tim for introducing me to this plugin. Honestly, it's such a game changer. And then I've got the Pro MB, the multiband compressor from Fat Filter, again just taming some boxy frequencies between 800 hertz to 1 kilohertz, and then the top range around 10 to 15 kilohertz just to reduce some harshness in the vocals. And last but not least, I've got Saturn 2 by Fat Filter just to saturate the vocal a bit more and to give it extra warmth. Effects wise, the lead vocal has got Delay by Valhalla, which I really love, and one trick I learned from Luca Pretolesi when I watched him mix Light It Up by Major Lazer, if you remember, is to sight chain your reverb to your vocal, and what that does essentially, it allows for the vocal to come first without being washed in reverb, and then the reverb comes after that. So essentially the compressor pulls it back and waits for it to finish so it can come and shine after that. And we have the same thing happening with some delay on the lead vocal just to give a bit more of a 3D sort of characteristic. We got parallel compression on the vocal standards, and then the backing vocals have got their reverb only just because I didn't want them to get in the way of the vocal and to make the whole thing sound super washed. Similar sort of plugins to the whole thing, to the lead vocal, and then the ad-libs. Coming from a singing background, I've worked with a lot of choir directors, vocal coaches, and collective in general, which has really helped me develop a good ear for backing vocals, harmonies, ad-libs, all these little things. And I was really keen on Frannie recording different ad-libs in different sections, so I had options to work with different colors in there, and we have for this ad-lib, for example.
I don't know.
And they're quite wet just because I didn't want them to be too prominent, but more of a embellishment. And in the end, this is what the whole thing sounds like.
It's too late, yeah, I've already fallen into you, and I can't get you out of my head. You don't care, but I'm already all in. If I can't get over you, you pull me under again.
This was my process behind creating Pull Me Under by Frannie B, guys. Let me know in the comments below if you've enjoyed it, if you've learned something new, something useful, or if you've got any suggestions based on what you heard and how you would do things. Hi there, thank you so much for hanging around and watching my video. Don't forget to subscribe and show me your support. Thank you.